Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the National Constitution Center's Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer, Vince Stango.
Good evening, everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the 2019 Liberty Medal ceremony honoring Anthony M. Kennedy, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. As you know, the National Constitution Center inspires citizens as the only place where people across America and from around the world can come together to learn about, debate, and celebrate the greatest vision of human freedom, the U.S. Constitution. We're honored to educate and inspire so many Americans about the meaning and importance of the U.S. Constitution, and it's because of you that we can engage in this meaningful work. On behalf of Jeff Rosen and the entire team at the National Constitution Center, I want to thank all of you, our donors, our partners and visitors, our public officials, many of whom are in the audience tonight, our corporate leadership council, and our superb board of trustees for everything you do to help us bring the U.S. Constitution to life. I'm sure many of you will want to share our program tonight with your friends and family. When you do, we invite you to use the hashtag Liberty Medal. However, we ask you to do so quietly, so thank you in advance for silencing your mobile devices now. There are some friends of the Constitution Center whose dedicated support helps to make nights like tonight possible. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me thank Cynthia McLeod, Superintendent of Independence National Historical Park. Doug DeVos, Chairman of the National Constitution Center's Executive Committee. Bill Sasso, Chairman, Stradley Ronan. Dan Fitzpatrick, President of Citizens Bank, Mid-Atlantic Region. Ira Lubert, Chairman, Lubert Adler. This year marks Ira Lubert and Pamela Stott's 11th year sponsoring the $100,000 prize. Please give Ira and Pam an extra round of applause for their incredibly generous support. One other person I'd like to recognize tonight is University of Pennsylvania President Dr. Amy Gutman. Amy couldn't be with us tonight, but for those guests who have attended the Liberty Medal ceremony in the past, know the many contributions that she's made to its success. She's chaired the Liberty Medal Committee for many years, and we thank her for her service and for the University of Pennsylvania's long-standing partnership. Let's thank everybody who's made tonight possible. As we honor Justice Kennedy tonight, we also celebrate our mission of civic education. There are many individuals who supported the Constitution Center's important work over the years, and I'd like to take a moment to recognize three such individuals who are no longer with us. This past year, we lost three trustees of the National Constitution Center: Joe Duckworth, Jack Bogle, and President George H.W. Bush. All three were strong believers in the U.S. Constitution, in the National Constitution Center, and in the importance of civic education. Their collective accomplishments are too numerous to list, but those of us in the room who had the genuine pleasure of spending time with them know the profound legacies they left behind. Please join me in a brief moment of silence as we celebrate the lives of Joe Duckworth, Jack Bogle, and President George H.W. Bush. Thank you. A few of our lead supporters recorded messages of support for Justice Kennedy, and we'd like to share those with you now. Please turn your attention to the screen behind me.
Welcome. I'm Dan Fitzpatrick, and I want to thank you for joining us as the National Constitution Center awards the 2019 Liberty Medal to Justice Anthony Kennedy for his commitment to civic education. Thomas Jefferson once said that democracy could not survive ignorant and free. And as we celebrate this year's Liberty Medal, we are reminded that we must know and understand the sources of our freedoms in order to defend them. The National Constitution Center is a platform for learning that provides students of all ages with the tools to understand the history of the Constitution and its meaning, including its relevancy in their own lives. We are grateful to Justice Kennedy for being a champion of civic education. And on behalf of Don McCree, our Vice Chairman and NCC Board member, and all of my colleagues at Citizens Bank, it's my privilege to join with all of you in celebrating as the National Constitution Center honors Justice Kennedy with the 2019 Liberty Medal.
Welcome. I'm Bill Sasso, and it's my great pleasure to join the National Constitution Center and all of you to celebrate the 2019 Liberty Medal honoring Justice Anthony M. Kennedy. Throughout his personal and professional life, Justice Kennedy has promoted open-minded civil discourse through word and through example. By engaging individuals of all ages, backgrounds, and perspectives, the National Constitution Center, too, strives to instill these habits of healthy, informed, civil dialogue, which are at the heart of its mission and crucial for the health of democracy. On behalf of my law firm, Stradley Ronan, it's my privilege to join with all of you in celebrating as the National Constitution Center honors Justice Anthony Kennedy with the 2019 Liberty Medal.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Bill. And thank you, Ira, for your lead support of tonight's event. Ladies and gentlemen, the program will begin in just a few short moments. Enjoy.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the National Constitution Center and the 2019 Liberty Medal ceremony. Please welcome Jeffrey Rosen, President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Constitution Center. Honorary Chairman of the National Constitution Center, the Honorable Neil M. Gorsuch. And our 2019 Liberty Medal recipient, the Honorable Anthony M. Kennedy.
To be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
The Declaration of Independence.
1776. 1787.
The United States Constitution is signed.
1787.
The 3/5 clause of the United States Constitution. 1860. Abraham Lincoln is elected president.
A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently. Half slave, half free. Abraham Lincoln.
1861. The Southern states secede.
1861.
The Civil War begins.
1862.
New Year's Eve.
The life and times of Frederick Douglass. An immense assembly convened in Tremont Temple to await the first flash of the electric wires announcing the new departure.
We were now met together to receive and celebrate the first utterance of the long-hoped-for proclamation.
We were waiting and listening as for a bolt from the sky which should rend the fetters of 4 millions of slaves.
We were watching, as it were, by the dim light of the stars for the dawn of a new day.
We were longing for the answer to the agonizing prayers of centuries. 8, 9, 10 o'clock came and went, and still no word.
At last, when suspense was becoming agony, a man with hasty step advanced through the crowd and exclaimed in tones that thrilled all hearts.
It's coming! It's on the wires!
Joy and gladness exhausted all forms of expression, from shouts of praise to sobs and tears.
My old friend Rue, a colored preacher, a man of wonderful vocal power, expressed the heartfelt emotion of the hour when he led all voices. Sound the loud timbrel o'er Egypt's dark sea. Jehovah hath triumphed, his people are free.
No more wedding, no more wedding, no more wedding, no wedding, with me, no wedding, no.
On the first day of January, in the year of our Lord, 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States, shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. And the executive government of the United States, including the military and naval authorities thereof, will recognize and maintain the freedom of said persons. And I further declare and make known that such person of suitable condition will be received into the armed service of the United States. And upon this act, sincerely believed to be an act of justice, warranted by the Constitution upon military necessity, I invoke the considerate judgment of mankind and the gracious favor of Almighty God by the President, Abraham Lincoln.
Bel Air, Maryland, August 25th, 1864. Mr. President, it is my desire to be free, to go to see my people on the Eastern Shore. My mistress won't let me. You will please let me know if we are free and what I can do. I write to you for advice. Please send me word this week or as soon as possible and oblige. Annie Davis.
The Civil War ends. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments are adopted.
1874. Representative Robert B. Elliott.
There are rights which are conferred onto us by the United States. There are other rights conferred onto us by the state of which we are individually the citizen. The 14th Amendment does not forbid a state to deny to all its citizens any of the rights which the state itself conferred. What it does forbid is inequality, is discrimination, or to use the words of the amendment itself, is the denial to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. The passage of this bill will determine the civil status, not only of the Negro, but of any other class of citizen who may feel themselves discriminated against. The motive that compels me is as broad as your Constitution. I advocate because it is right.
1875.
Philadelphia.
What we need today in the onward march of humanity is a public sentiment in favor of common justice and simple mercy. Inviting you to this work, I do not promise you fair sailing in unclouded skies. You may meet with coolness where you expect sympathy, disappointment where you feel sure of success, isolation and loneliness instead of heart support and cooperation. But for a life that is in harmony with God and sympathy for man, there is no such word as fail. Let no misfortunes crush you, no hostility of enemies or failure of friends discourage you. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. United States.
Citizen.
Enforce.
Privileges or immunities.
Due process.
Equal protection of the laws. Equal.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jeffrey Rosen.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the National Constitution Center. That extraordinarily moving theater piece is an excerpt from 14, a staged reading of original documents that my incredible colleagues here at the NCC created for visitors to our new gallery, Civil War and Reconstruction, The Battle for Freedom and Equality. Thanks to our two actors who so beautifully memorized the original text, Tay Sconyers and Nathan Alford Tate. The gallery and the show tell the story of how the American creed can be expressed in a single sentence, namely the second sentence of the Declaration of Independence, which we just saw on the screen. That sentence begins, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." The gallery tells the story of how the equal liberty promised in the Declaration was imperfectly realized in the original Constitution, resurrected by heroes like Frederick Douglass and Lincoln at Gettysburg, and finally enshrined in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. On touchstones in the gallery, and on our new interactive Constitution online, you can learn more about the shining promise of equal liberty by exploring the relationship between Jefferson's Declaration, the original Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the post-Civil War amendments. Using an exciting tool called the drafting table, my colleagues and I learned together that when Jefferson wrote the Declaration and when Madison wrote the Bill of Rights, both were inspired by George Mason's Virginia Declaration of Rights of 1776. It took about 90 years for Mason's promise that all men are by nature equally free and independent to be incorporated into the Constitution, and it took about 150 years for women to be included, an anniversary we will celebrate next year in 2020. Lincoln, standing in front of Independence Hall on February 22nd, 1861. And let's pause to look at Independence Hall, for it sanctifies and makes sacred our ceremony today. Standing in front of Independence Hall right there, Lincoln, under a flag that now hangs in the gallery downstairs, said, "I have never had a feeling, politically, that did not spring from the sentiments embodied in the Declaration of Independence." At Gettysburg, Lincoln said the nation was conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. In the end, it was the framers of the 14th Amendment, with Jefferson and Mason's declarations at their side, who enshrined the promise of equal liberty into the Constitution. Ladies and gentlemen, we meet this evening to award the 2019 Liberty Medal to one of the most passionate champions of equal liberty in the history of the Supreme Court, Justice Anthony Kennedy. And as Lincoln said at Gettysburg, it is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. Perhaps no justice in the history of the Supreme Court has been more associated with the word liberty than Justice Kennedy. A book about Justice Kennedy's jurisprudence is called, appropriately, The Tie Goes to Freedom, Justice Kennedy on Liberty. In his 554 Supreme Court opinions and in countless speeches, Justice Kennedy tirelessly returns to three themes: the importance of civic education for the preservation of equal liberty for all, the importance of individual liberty of speech and conscience in preserving civil dialogue and debate, and the importance of equal dignity in ensuring the freedom on which human flourishing depends. Justice Kennedy's first theme is civic education for all, for he is always and everywhere a teacher. He's created a reading list of 69 books for people of all ages to educate themselves about liberty. It's called Understanding Freedom's Heritage: How to Keep and Defend Liberty. The list begins with Sophocles' Antigone. It includes Susan B. Anthony's Women's Right to the Suffrage, and it ends with Reese Witherspoon's Harvard Law School commencement address in Legally Blonde. I actually watched it on YouTube last night, and it is a fine speech. Reese Witherspoon concludes that, with no offense to Aristotle, passion is a key ingredient in the study and practice of law and of life. I had an extraordinary experience. Lauren and I had a tour of the Civil War Gallery an hour ago. I thought I was giving it to Justice Kennedy, but he gave it to Lauren and to a small group of family and friends. And when he came to the Declaration of Independence, he emphasized that Jefferson saw civic education itself as an individual moral duty. He observed that in recognizing the pursuit of happiness as an unalienable right, Jefferson wasn't thinking of happiness in its modern sense of enjoying a meal or a trip or a consumer gadget. What Jefferson meant instead, Justice Kennedy taught us downstairs, was that happiness comes from fulfilling one's duty to promote civic virtue and to advance the public good. And Justice Kennedy was entirely correct about Jefferson's conception of the pursuit of happiness. A new book on the pursuit of happiness in the founding era confirms that Jefferson, following Aristotle, and with no offense to Reese Witherspoon, held that only by mastering our passions and cultivating our faculties of reason can we achieve the eudaimonia, as Justice Kennedy noted, or lasting well-being that comes from governing ourselves and serving others. And that's why Jefferson insisted that we need civic education for individual and political self-governance. Here at the National Constitution Center, we have accepted Justice Kennedy's challenge to inspire students to learn about the Constitution so they can learn the habits of civil discourse on which the future of freedom depends. That's why we are so excited to have launched the new and expanded interactive Constitution with the support of many in this room, and I want to say thanks so much to all of you for making this extraordinary learning platform possible. The platform includes essays by America's leading constitutional scholars, educational videos, lesson plans for high school students, and perhaps most significantly and most excitingly, it includes online exchanges that will allow classrooms across America to connect for hour-long discussions about the Constitution, moderated by judges and master teachers. These path-breaking exchanges have the potential to connect millions of students in every state in the Union to engage in the reasoned discourse about the Constitution that Justice Kennedy has championed. Justice Kennedy's second theme is the importance of freedom of speech and thought and conscience in promoting civil dialogue and debate. By many measures, during more than 30 years on the Supreme Court, Justice Kennedy was the most pro-free speech justice. Between 1994 and 2002, he voted against the government in nearly 3/4 of the free speech cases, far more than any other justice. Justice Kennedy's commitment to free speech is powerfully displayed in his concurring opinion in Texas versus Johnson, the flag-burning case. In 1989, by a 5-4 vote, the court struck down a Texas law that prohibited protesters from burning the American flag. Justice Kennedy said, "It is poignant but fundamental that the flag protects those who hold it in contempt. Why did Justice Kennedy believe that that flag, the majestic flag flying over us now, protects those who hold it in contempt? Because of his profound commitment to freedom of conscience, limited government, respect for the individual, and tolerance of diverse viewpoints. That leads to Justice Kennedy's third significant contribution to American jurisprudence and American life, his insistence on equal liberty and dignity for all individuals. Although Justice Kennedy believes that cultivating our faculties of reason is a moral duty, he also believes that the equal liberty protected by the Constitution means that moral disapproval of individuals or groups based on animus or prejudice has no place in the law. He has written, "Moral disapproval of a group, like a bare desire to harm the group, is an interest that is insufficient to satisfy the Equal Protection Clause." That's from Lawrence versus Texas. In a 2003 speech, Justice Kennedy declared that liberty means the right to search for dignity, and in the landmark Obergefell case in 2015, the case that recognized marriage equality across the land, he wrote, "These men and women ask for equal dignity in the eyes of the law. The Constitution grants them that right." Given his pivotal role in American law for more than 3 decades, Justice Kennedy's jurisprudence of liberty and equal dignity, of course, did not please all of the people all of the time. But even when justices and citizens disagreed with particular opinions by Justice Kennedy, they had to respect the fact that the justice is always guided not by his political views, but by his sincere conception of what the liberty promised by the Constitution requires. In every case, Justice Kennedy did something that we try to teach all citizens to do here at the National Constitution Center: to separate your political from your constitutional views, asking not what the government should do, but what the Constitution allows or forbids it to do. The hard fact, Justice Kennedy has said, is that sometimes we must make decisions we do not like. We make them, he said in the flag-burning case, because they are right. Right in the sense that the law and the Constitution, as we see them, compel the result. In interpreting the Constitution, Justice Kennedy always put liberty first. But Justice Kennedy believes that liberty will only come first if we, the people, learn about it and defend it. As Justice Kennedy puts it, it's of essential importance that in this new age, we must develop a dialogue, a consensus, a civility, a kinship, a bond of freedom that will enable you to control the destiny of your country. For providing a shining example of principled devotion to liberty, civil dialogue, and civic education, please join me in thanking Justice Anthony Kennedy. The National Constitution Center matters now more than ever. All of us have heard the statistics. 1/3 of Americans can't name a single branch of government. Only 1/3 can name all 3. Madison said that a people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power knowledge gives. Our mission at the National Constitution Center is to inspire Americans of all perspectives to learn about the Constitution so we can govern ourselves on the basis of reason rather than passion, devoted not to self-interest, but to the public good. The National Constitution Center has created a unique educational platform to inspire all Americans to learn about the Constitution. It's called the Interactive Constitution, and it brings together America's leading constitutional scholars of diverse perspectives to explore areas of agreement and debate about every clause of the Constitution.
One of the highlights of the Interactive Constitution are the classroom exchanges. This program brings classrooms together from across the country for constitutional civil dialogues. These are dialogues using the Constitution, and they're moderated by master teachers and judges. The Constitutional Ambassadors Program brings students to the Constitution Center for a 4-hour immersive experience on the Constitution and the contemporary issues around it. Here, students get to explore interactive exhibits. There's live theater performances on the Constitution, rare artifacts, and priceless primary source documents. They get to explore these ideas on the contemporary issues with other students and engage in civil dialogues that will really help them be the ambassadors around our city and our country.
We take our own backgrounds as children and we bring it out in public, and then we take their own. And then we're both kind of grabbing straws in a sense and going home with something more holistic.
We, for some reason, have lost the ability to engage in civic dialogue. And so if our young people can model that for us and learn how to do that, and learn how to do that around pieces of text that are part of the Constitution, then we'll all benefit.
It's so important to bring kids here so they can experience this inspiring building here on Independence Mall, right across from Independence Hall where the Constitution was drafted.
I'm fascinated, Jeff, with this building. You're literally and symbolically surrounded by the Constitution.
Justice Kennedy is one of America's most passionate advocates of civic education. Above all, Justice Kennedy is a master teacher. He spent 23 years as a professor of constitutional law, and he's urged audiences young and old in the United States and around the world to educate themselves about the Constitution, reminding us of the stakes. As Justice Kennedy says, freedom and democracy are not in your DNA. Freedom is taught, and teaching is a conscious act.
The verdict on freedom is still out. Half the world is the jury, and they are out. And they're looking to you to see if freedom works. And this country owes a duty to the Constitution, to itself, and to the idea of freedom to conduct a decent, rational, respectful, probing civic discourse.
As a representative of the court and emissary of the rule of law, the justice made an indelible mark outside the court as well. We saw as law clerks that whether he was speaking to groups of elementary school children visiting the court, or when he headed to China as the first sitting justice to visit that country to speak about the importance of an independent judiciary and civil liberties, the justice was committed to promoting respect for the rule of law through education. He's a living example of engaged citizenry and an inspiration to all of us as lawyers, judges, teachers, community members, and just as parents, to carry that civic education forward and to ensure that the independence of our courts and the rights and responsibilities enshrined in our Constitution are understood, honored, and protected for and by the next generation.
George Washington urged Congress to create a national university that would instruct students in the science of government so that they could learn the foundations of their liberties. And in creating the National Constitution Center during the bicentennial of the Constitution, Congress finally answered Washington's call. During this Liberty Medal, we honor Justice Kennedy, we celebrate civic education, and we unite around our shared commitment to the greatest document of human freedom in history, the U.S. Constitution. The National Constitution Center has been honored by an extraordinarily distinguished group of chairs, and as Vince Stango mentioned in his introduction, we lost two of them this year, the great Jack Bogle and President George H.W. Bush. They were followed by President Bill Clinton, Governor Jeb Bush, and Vice President Joe Biden. And now we are so fortunate that Justice Neil Gorsuch has agreed to serve as our new Honorary Chair. a former law clerk to Justice Kennedy, Justice Gorsuch was the first Supreme Court clerk to serve on the bench with his former boss. On Constitution Day, I was privileged to watch Justice Gorsuch as he interacted with students and citizens, and his kindness and thoughtfulness in answering their questions and sharing his love for the Constitution was moving and remarkable. I also interviewed him about his superb new book, A Republic, If You Can Keep It. And in that book, he explains why he has chosen to make the promotion of civics and civility the focus of his public outreach. We're so honored to have him. Please join me in welcoming our new Honorary Chair, Justice Neil Gorsuch.
Thank you, Jeffrey. The work you and your team do here at the Constitution Center, I think, couldn't be more vital than it is today. Everyone in this room knows the challenges we face, like the fact that only about 30% of young people today think it's important to live in a democracy, or the fact that so many people today dismiss as foolish virtues like civility, equality, and mutual respect. Virtues that are nothing more and nothing less than evidence of our commitment to human equality and keystones of democratic self-government. The Center's mandate to teach the young and the old about our Constitution and about the values and virtues that undergird it has never been more important. Thank you for the work you do, Jeffrey. Now, Jeff has asked me to share a few words about my mentor, my colleague, my friend, Justice Anthony Kennedy. And as a starting point, I can think of no award more appropriate to the man than the Liberty Medal. As Jeffrey's discussed, so much about his career and jurisprudence are about reminding us that the blessings of liberty promised in our foundational charters belong not just to the rich or to the popular, but to each and every one of us. In case after case, over more than 40 years as a federal judge, Justice Kennedy has proven himself the greatest friend of liberty of our age. But I hope that isn't all that history has to record about Justice Kennedy. For as much as his rulings have influenced our law, the man has touched the lives of those around him and in ways that hold rich lessons all their own. So while I know each of you came here tonight already with a deep admiration for Justice Kennedy, I'd like to share a few more personal words about Tony Kennedy. I first came to know the man when I served as his step clerk. Justice Byron White had hired me to serve as his law clerk during his first year in retirement, when he primarily worked by designation on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit. But when I arrived, Justice Kennedy quickly adopted me and treated me every bit as a member of his own law clerk family as one of his native sons. The year began when the justice asked all of us clerks to come out to his home on the weekend to discuss the first set of merits cases. His only instruction was to bring the whiteboard. So we trucked out to Virginia in a clunker of a car with a whiteboard in the trunk, and we spent the whole day, debating cases and covering that board with arguments and diagrams in the justice's basement. From that moment to the end of the year, I witnessed a gentleman who never raised his voice, who treated every lawyer before him in the courtroom and every person he encountered in the hall as he would wish to be treated, and who afforded the most routine case the same care as the most important. In his already long and distinguished career, Justice Kennedy had encountered many of the issues we law clerks now faced for the very first time. Yet even in the seemingly easiest cases, he would follow the judicial process scrupulously from start to finish. He treated every case the same. He He carefully read all of the mountain of briefs, which he likes to tease me about now having to read myself. He would listen to the parties with incredible care. He'd talk the issues over with his law clerks and with his colleagues, and only then would he decide the case. His enthusiasm, his attention to detail, his interest in hearing and entertaining different views than his own, and his willingness to change his mind. Those were infectious. And when at last he did reach a final judgment and found himself at odds with a colleague or a clerk, he wouldn't hesitate to disagree, but he never did so disagreeably. Never in person, never in print. Years later, when I became a judge myself on the 10th Circuit, I asked the justice to come out to Colorado to swear me in. And of course he came. And of course I took the chance to seek his advice. His reply? Listen. Listen to your colleagues. Listen to the parties. Listen to the scholars in the field. There's a reason why federal courts of appeals sit in collegial panels, he reminded me, and a reason we engage in such a painstaking process before announcing our judgments. Appreciate always, he said, that to those involved in the case before you, it may be the most important thing in their lives. Remember, the judge's job is a hard one. You must decide. Someone must win, someone must lose. And each time, you're likely to be criticized by somebody and praised by somebody else. Pay no attention to either of those things. Those winds shift daily, and they mean little. Remember instead, you're part of something much greater and sturdier than any of that. The promise of the rule of law and of equal justice in our own time. The nation's independent courts may not be perfect, he told me, but their aim of seeking to supply equal justice under law for all persons represents one of the noblest of human aspirations in any place or any age. Justice Kennedy could say things like that because he lived those truths. Fast forward again, and about 2.5 years ago, Justice Kennedy swore me in for a second time, this time on the Supreme Court. It was the first time in history that a justice and his former law clerk were able to serve together. No surprise by now, the justice and his wife, Mary, offered Louise and me a welcome to Washington and to the court that could not have been more gracious. As everybody who knows them knows, Mary Kennedy is every bit as special as her husband. The Kennedys were among the very first to invite us to dinner and to introduce us to their friends. They even helped us with our house hunt. When I circulated a draft of my very first opinion for the court, it was a pretty easy case. That's what they give the junior justice. And it was sure to be unanimous. Well, Justice Kennedy wanted to beat the rest of his colleagues to the punch and be the first to join the opinion. Unfortunately, the foibles of technology thwarted him. I had circulated a draft late in the day after he had gone home. So Justice Kennedy asked one of his law clerks to fax the opinion to him. But for some reason, that old machine wouldn't quite cooperate. So Justice Kennedy still wouldn't risk waiting to get a copy until the next morning because somebody else might join first. So what did he do? He asked to have someone drive the opinion out to his home that night. And when I came in the next morning, I had Justice Kennedy's hand-signed join memo in my inbox. That was the first join memo I received as a justice. I keep it in the top drawer of my desk, and I will always treasure it. As great as Justice Kennedy's judicial legacy certainly is, I cannot help but wonder if Tony Kennedy, the person that I've just sort of tried to describe to you a little bit, may have as much to teach us today. I've offered only a few of so many examples of the man I've known, but the truth is, everyone who knows Tony and Mary Kennedy is blessed with an overabundance of memories like mine. And what they've witnessed perhaps boils down to this. The rules Tony Kennedy has chosen to follow in his life, he's chosen very carefully, and he's worked hard to abide. They are timeless, they are tested, and they are true. They represent what is best, if too often missing, in our profession and our culture today. They're truths like these. Treat others as you would have them treat you. Remember that those whom you disagree with love this country every bit as much as you do. Strive for humility in argument and in decision-making, knowing that everyone has something to offer and teach. Accept praise and criticism with equal equanimity, realizing that life's true joy lies not in serving yourself, but in serving something greater. Don't dwell on this nation's many imperfections so much that you overlook its aspirations to the rule of law, to protecting the unalienable rights of the poor and unpopular, as well as the mighty and the rich. Remember that these are among the most noble aspirations in all of human history. And along the way, be kind. For whatever regrets you may have in life, you'll never regret being kind. Of course, no one's perfect. We all stumble and struggle. So along the way, learn to pick yourself back up, dust yourself off, and aim again at getting it right. These are the simple but enduring virtues Tony Kennedy has sought to honor in his life. And I cannot help but wonder if in our time and place, they hold especially important lessons. For what people can rule themselves in peace and with respect for the rights of others, if they are never taught or do not aspire to honor these same truths. Liberty's future depends not only on the professional contributions of those like Justice Kennedy, it depends on personal virtues like those Tony Kennedy has always sought to honor. Truly, his life is a grace to our nation and a model to those who follow. Please will you join me in congratulating the entire Kennedy family and honoring Justice Anthony Kennedy as he comes to receive the Liberty Medal.
We will now present the Liberty Medal. Justice Kennedy, you have worked tirelessly on the Supreme Court to put liberty first. You have insisted that liberty of speech and conscience are hallmarks of a free society. You have recognized that government cannot control our thoughts and must tolerate diverse views. You have defended equal liberty for all. You have been an inspiring advocate for civil dialogue, serving yourself as a model of reasoned discourse, kindness, and civility, and you have challenged all citizens to take up the mantle of educating ourselves about liberty so that we, the people, can preserve, protect, and defend it. For your service to the cause of civic education and liberty under law, it is a great honor for the National Constitution Center to award you the 2019 Liberty Medal.
Please be seated. Only the trial lawyers need remain standing. Jeff Rosen, my dear friend and esteemed colleague, Neil Gorsuch, and those of you who are here, all of you, to show your admiration, your respect, your reverence for the Constitution and for the liberty that it secures. Please be assured that over the years, my family and my colleagues, Neil, on the Supreme Court, will share with me the pride that we have in receiving this medal, the pride that we have in knowing that the Constitutional Center, the National Constitutional Center, each year is devoted to preserving the idea and the reality of the rule of law and, again, of the freedom that it secures. You have our profound and lasting thanks. Please be assured that this medal, that this event, this place, this evening will give us new dedication, new energy, new dynamism as we move forward in this magnificent world that so needs the Constitution and the values that it embodies. We were fascinated a few years ago to be at Independence Hall and then to walk up to the Constitution Center. We later found out that it's about 1,100 feet, just shy of 400 yards. And it's important for us to move forward. And as we go from the from the Independence Hall to the National Constitution Center, we not only go forward, but we look upward at this beautiful building. It's not a great tall building, but it soars, just like the Constitution does. If you think in terms of a timeline, you leave Independence Hall, and as you begin to walk those approximately 400 yards, if you think of it as a timeline, you very quickly are at 1776, the Declaration of Independence, 1787 when the Constitution was drafted, 1789 when it was ratified, 1791 when the Bill of Rights was added. Jefferson was in Paris when the Constitutional Convention met. Adams was in London at the Court of St. James. And we were talking earlier whether or not the Constitution would have been an easy to draft, difficult as it was, if they had been there. But Jefferson was very interested in it, so we emailed him a copy of the Constitution over in Paris. And he said, well, where's the Bill of Rights? And they said, there's no Bill of Rights. He said, how can you have a Constitution without a Bill of Rights? And so by a gentleman's agreement, gentlemen in those days, lady, a gentleman's agreement, it was understood that if the Constitution were ratified, that a Bill of Rights would be added, and they kept their word. And we had the Bill of Rights in 1791. So as you walk up and you think about this timeline, you get more excited and you walk faster. And if you're with a group, you might hear somebody say, please, not so fast. I'm a black person, and you've put chains on me. Chains on me for a great part of this journey. Please, please wait for me. We must realize that as magnificent as our Constitution is, it had some tragic flaws. It is still a brilliant document. Gladstone once made the statement, the British Constitution was born. The American Constitution was made. So you wonder, well, this is kind of a dismissive attitude, but if you look at it at the full sentence, it's magnificent. He said, the British Constitution, I said born, the British Constitution was grown. The British Constitution was grown Just as the British Constitution is the single most subtle organism ever to emerge from a complex progressive history, so is the American Constitution the single most brilliant document ever struck off at a given time from the brain and purpose of man. That was his tribute to the American Constitution. We think of the Constitution of 1789, as a word with a capital C, and we should think of it that way. It's a legal document, but it binds us. We're a nation of many creeds, many ethnicities, many religions, many backgrounds, but we are bound together by this Constitution, this written Constitution, one of the oldest in the world. And we must never forget that. That's the Constitution with a big C. And as you know, many of you here, I've studied it in the school, I've helped teach it, and it can be a lifetime study. Article 1 is the legislative branch. Article 2 is the executive power. Article 3 is the judicial power. You look at Article 1, and it's very specific about what the Congress can do: raise and support armies, levy taxes, regulate commerce among the several states and the Indian tribes, and so forth. But then you look at Article 2 on the executive, and it looks like it was written by different people. The sentences are longer. It's puzzling what the executives can do. You have to pick out the commander-in-chief and receive foreign ambassadors, foreign ministers, from the middle of a sentence. And the possible, or most likely explanation is that the framers weren't sure of what the executive looked like, but they knew that Washington would be the first president, and this was an age of trust, and they trusted that man. And he became the first president of the United States. When high school groups come to visit the court, Justice Gorsuch and my other colleagues often meet them, and that's been my practice as well. And one of my questions to students sometimes is, what did they think? Why do they name this city George Washington? Well, Washington anyway. What did he do? And pretty soon they start talking, and of course they say that he was the general, one of the only generals. He said, "I'll be the general. Where's the army?" They said, "Oh, you go out and get the army." And so he won the Revolutionary War. He then showed that the presidency could work. But in between, he was president of the Constitutional Convention. And you read the minutes of the Constitutional Convention, and some of the delegates say the differences between us are greater than the differences in Russia and Turkey. But they didn't leave the convention because you didn't walk out on the general. And that was one of his great contributions. And so we have this magnificent Constitution with a capital C. It has the First Amendment in it. The First Amendment obviously protects free speech, but we should remember that it does not incorporate the philosophy of moral relativism. If you read the Supreme Court's opinion on free speech, the Supreme Court said, "Oh, every book is protected, every movie's protected." Does it sound like the court makes no judgment, that there's no good and bad? That's the philosophy of moral relativism. Is the court adopting a philosophy? No, all the court is saying is the government doesn't make those decisions, you do. In a responsible society, the citizens decide that a book or a movie is priceless. It's wonderful, it's inspiring, or that it's junk. Now, the next time you see an interview on the television or of a book or a film, and everybody's denouncing it, somebody say, "Oh, there's a First Amendment right to have it." I know that. But it's the government's duty to let the citizens make these judgments, and we should have a civic dialogue that enables us to make those judgments. That's the Constitution with a big C. But then there's a Constitution with a small c. Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, Harrington, Jacques Maritain, and Aristotle talked about the constitution of a people. And by that, they meant the sum total of their mores, their traditions, their customs, their aspirations, their heritage. What is it that defines a people? That's the Constitution with a small c. And we have a Constitution with a small c. It's what the rest of the world looks at most of the time. The rest of the world doesn't look at the Constitution with a big C. The rest of the world looks at the Constitution with a small c, and they judge us by what our civic discourse is, by what our respect for each other is, and how it's expressed. That's the Constitution they see, this Constitution with a small c, the Constitution that defines us. And the rest of the world is watching, and the verdict of freedom is still out. And we have a duty to show by our civic discourse that we can be a rational, thoughtful, tolerant, decent, kind people. We've mentioned Aristotle several times. Aristotle, as some of you may remember, listed the different forms of government, as did Plato, and they both of them listed different forms of government, aristocracy, monarchy, oligarchy, and democracy, and they gave democracy the lowest grade. Aristotle has always been one of my great heroes. Why did he give my form of government a low grade? So 2 summers ago, it was my project to reread Aristotle. And my conclusion was that he thought democracy did not have the capacity to mature. It's our destiny to prove him wrong. The Constitution itself presumes that there will be respectful, productive dialogue between the branches. We talk about separation of powers. Some branches of the government each have their own powers that the others can intrude upon. The Congress can raise and support armies, declare war, the president's commander-in-chief. The court has cases. These are powers that they have that's separate. But there's also checks and balances, and that means that the branches must work together. We, every year, send 2 of the members of our court to the Congress to say that we need resources, we need the money. This is checks and balances. And it's a respectful, decent, thoughtful, progressive discussion. We must remember this, because how we behave as a government in a formal sense should set an example for how our citizens should be. We don't expect the other branches of the government that talk to the way lawyers do. We have the language of the law. The language of the law has an elegance, a dimension, a boundary, a tradition, an aesthetic, a grammar that's different from the political branches. Not better, not worth different. The world wouldn't be very interesting if everybody talked like judges do. But we do have this language which sets an example. And in these times, I know Justice Gorsuch agrees, I know Jeff Rosen agrees, it's more important than ever for judges to show that they are committed to the proposition, the difficult discussions, difficult issues are best resolved by discussions that are thoughtful, decent, rational. Aristotle used the word anoia, which means respect. And he said that if A has a disagreement with B, and they're going to have a discussion, they have to begin with respect for each other as the precondition of that discussion. And we must understand this in our civic life today. So these are some reflections on, on the meaning of our Constitution, the Constitution with a big C, the Constitution with a small c. And the two, of course, should sustain each other. for this award, for this event, for this evening. You have my profound thanks. Washington and his countrymen were sons of the Enlightenment. We sometimes think of the Enlightenment as going from Europe to the United States, or from Europe to America, which it did. The great hero of the Enlightenment was Sir Isaac Newton. People didn't understand Principia Mathematica. It's a pretty tough read. But this idea that the human mind of its own power can find a law that explains why the apple drops from the tree, this was revolutionary. This meant that the human mind can explore the universe with logic and thoughtfulness and reason. And for over 200 years, at the end of his life and after he died, Isaac Newton was the hero of enlightenment. And he was succeeded in that position by George Washington, an American. The Enlightenment worked both ways. We were saying earlier, Franklin wrote probably 15,000 letters in his lifetime. Jefferson, probably 12,000. They were wonderful writers. Read the preamble to the Constitution of the United States. It's hard. If I say, you go home and read the Constitution, it'll take you 2.5 hours and your mind will wander after 3 or 4 minutes. Read the preamble. It's simply brilliant. Begins with the words United States, ends with the words of the United States, all in a single sentence. These were sons of the Enlightenment, and Washington was a son of the Enlightenment. And let me close with what he told his troops for the Battle of New York. He combined the terms free and liberty, Jeff, which are two different words. They're not always synonymous. It's a fascinating exercise to determine the subtle differences between them, but he used them both. He said, "We are free men struggling to preserve and secure liberty for ourselves and our posterity." That's Washington's message to us now, just as it was to the troops in the Revolutionary War. Thank you for your commitment to this center, which embodies your fascination, your admiration, your support, your adherence to that idea of the Constitution and the liberty that it secures. Thank you.
Thank you for attending the National Constitution Center's 2019 Liberty Medal Ceremony.